My name is Ondřej Piálek. I work at a small social business called Endzone.io or Endzone Software. We work with purpose-driven web agencies or social businesses and charities. And a big of our business is actually contributing back towards the community that we work with. So Umbraco is a great community, open source community, and that's really aligned well with what I'm going to talk about today, which is A/B testing for Umbraco using a package, open source package that we created. You might also know us from Happy Porch Radio, which is a podcast. Second season was about all Umbraco. And Barry O'Kane, the owner of the agency, got an MVP award for this at Code Garden this year. So it was quite cool. So let me show you what I have prepared for you today. I think most of you know what A/B testing is, or at least have a vague idea. But just like a really quick summary of what it is. And A/B testing is not just used for websites, but you can use it for anything, really, not just websites or web pages. But I'm just going to stick into the context of building websites because that's why we are here today. So in essence, A/B testing is a very efficient tool to evaluate some proposed changes to your website. Essentially, what you do is just you create another copy of your page. You create the changes that you think might work better for the visitors of your website. You pitch them against each other, diverting half of the traffic to each of the variations. And then as you learn about visitor interaction with your website, after being exposed to each of the variations, you evaluate the performance of each variation and then decide, this page is performing much better promoting my goal. So I will keep that. I will integrate this change into my website. Let's go into a bit more detail why you should care about A/B testing and why is it relevant. So we are in the business of building websites. Either we have websites of our own or we create websites for our clients. And when you are a client and you want a website built, you usually follow or pursue a certain goal. You want to achieve something with your website. Also, most of the time you spend a lot of money creating your website and you want to make sure that your website is performing very well. So after you spend a lot of money creating the website, it's still very unlikely that the website that you just created is performing optimally. And that is why you still need to keep making changes even as the site is live. Usually we tend to embrace change these days with agile processes and methodologies where we say, okay, changes are fine, let's just do them. But once you deliver the website to your client, that's not the end of the life cycle of the page. And actually, at that point, it's a great opportunity for you to be able to learn how the website performs in a real-world scenario. While you're just building the site, you don't have any real-world data. So as an owner of a website, I'm more keen to keep iterating over the design so that my site stays relevant and adapts to the ever-changing environment where it lives. Most of us here are working for agencies that create these websites, so A/B testing is also relevant for you. We recently did a survey of 200 agencies operating in the Umbraco space, and what was really outstanding, one of the major concerns that they had was the lack of marketing tools that are available for the Umbraco ecosystem. Another major issue that they identified was competing against other CMSs, mainly with the other CMSs having, as Niels put it, a lot of crap in them that looks good on paper, all the features are there, but here we are coming with a very simple Umbraco site which can do anything you want, but you need to convince your clients that it can do that. So this is why you should care about A/B testing, is just filling one of the gaps in content marketing, and it's free and open source, so you can just start using it straight away, and I'm going to show you how easy that is. What was also interesting is that we worked with a digital agency recently who does SEO and SEO services. They provide SEO services to their clients, and one of the things they wanted to do always was to do A/B testing, but they were always afraid of there being too much of a barrier of entry, just getting all the infrastructure up to speed. So once we showed them uSplit, they were actually really surprised, and they said that it removed all the technical barriers to do A/B testing. So they could start integrating it into their system, offering it to their clients, and so can you as a paid service, or just mention it that your Umbraco solution can do this for them. I have two examples here of how real businesses used A/B testing to a really great to achieve great results. So one of the examples here is SimCity, my favorite game. They just released a new version of SimCity, and they wanted to promote their sales. So on the right hand, you can see the original page that had a big promotional banner on top, trying to drive the sales even further. But they weren't quite happy with the performance of that page, so they were thinking, what can we do? And they just decided, let's try and remove the banner on the top. And quite counterintuitively, you'd think, oh, well, this is promoting my sales even further. Quite counterintuitively, the page without the banner did much better, and the sales almost doubled, which for a business that's selling millions of copies of a game is quite a significant increase. And one of the reasons that they were going into why this might have worked is because people, going to that page already knew the franchise, and they wanted to just go to that page to buy the game. They didn't care about the incentive, which actually, if you look at the screenshot here, might have been pushing the actual content that people came for, below the fold, or just hiding it. So probably not the best design decision, even though that's what they originally went for. Another example I have is Grove. They provide help desk software, and for a long time they were really keen on good and slick looking design, and put a lot of effort in having very nice visuals on their page. But they weren't quite happy, even though they were happy with how it looks, they weren't quite happy with how the page performs. What they did was to follow a really thorough A/B testing process, including doing interviews with their existing customers who bought the service, or with some people who decided not to purchase it but left their email in, and went on call with them, tried to gather as much data as they could to learn about their visitors. And based on the feedback that they got, they created a new, very different version of their homepage. And if you look at that, it's very text heavy. It looks very different, and they were very they were afraid that if they push that, it's going to drive the sales even to a lower percentage, because in their mind, it didn't look as useful as the page you can see on the right. So they used A/B testing to verify that, and sort of to mitigate the risk by exposing only a certain part of the traffic to the new version. And to their surprise, they learned that it's performing much better. And again, the reason for that is they try to analyze their visitors. They gathered feedback, and they rebuilt the page using their visitors' language. So that's very powerful, and that's something you can do as well. What I want to point out here is that they went into very great depth about explaining how they did the whole thing. So if you want to have a very good case study for how you can do A/B testing, you can look at the link on the top and read about their implementation of that. One thing I also want to point out, though, that I showed two examples of very successful A/B tests, but you shouldn't expect this performance at all when you're running your own tests. Most of the time you will see no change, or very minimal change that you can attribute to some random factor or seasonality or other things. But it still doesn't mean that you didn't learn anything. At least you can go to bed and sleep without thinking, oh, I still think I should do that change. And you tested it, you got your results, and if it's inconclusive, you just throw that away and not do anything. Okay, so let's talk about how you can deliver A/B testing for your Umbraco site. Generally speaking, there are three ways to do it. Either you can use a redirect-based technique. When a visitor arrives at your page, the page loads, but then they're redirected to a variation if there is an experiment running, and if they should be included in that. This is what Google Analytics Experiments uses. That's a free tool as well. Or you can do client-side A/B testing, which loads the page, and there's a piece of JavaScript that changes the page on the client without any redirects. So it's using JavaScript just to change the page. Or you can use something that's integrated on the server side that will just send the altered content to the visitor in one single request. And that's what uSplit does. Let's go into slightly more detail about this. So as I said, redirect-based, they use redirect, so you load the page, then it calls into remote service, A/B testing service, such as Google Analytics, to decide whether the experiment should be running, and if it does the redirect, and you're sent to a different page. What that means for us, Umbraco developers, is that we need to create this content variation inside the CMS. And it's fine when you're maybe testing some of the leaf nodes, but if you're A/B testing your homepage, it means that you usually need to clone the whole website, including all the child nodes, so that all your navigation keeps working, etc. But you're actually interested only in testing your landing page or the homepage, and you don't want to be changing your child nodes. So what you actually end up with is having all the child nodes having the same content for both variations, and being offered on under different URLs, which is bad for SEO. And also, if you use dynamic navigation, to generate navigation on the fly based on the tree of content that you have on your site, and you start creating variations of your content there, you start polluting your menus with the variations inside there. So you might hide that, but then if you land on the variation, what's going to happen? You're going to see the variation still, or if you don't include it there, your menus will stop working. It won't show where you are, so that's bad for the user experience as well. And another thing about UX is that it's using redirects, as I said, which might be slow, especially if you're on a slow connection. So there's some disadvantages of using this technique. The other method was using client-side tests. These are quite popular these days. There's Optimizely and Visual Website Optimizer, both of which are, however, paid, and they cost quite a lot of money, so perhaps not applicable to all those cost-sensitive website owners. What happens is that you wait for the page to load, and then you have a small snippet of JavaScript that again calls into the remote A/B testing service to download all the changes that you've created for that page, and then executes that JavaScript to create those changes on the fly on the client. What's quite cool about this approach is that those services usually give you a visual editor where you tweak the site. So you open up the page, the original page, and then you start moving content around, changing colors, changing copy, and that's looking very slick, and it's quite nice. However, you don't have much control over what JavaScript gets generated, or you can actually code it. You can code JavaScript yourself. But the disadvantage here again is that you need to wait for an extra content to be downloaded. Either it's a blocking call, and then if you're on a slow connection, you need to wait for the page to load, for the extra resource to load before you can show anything, or it's not a blocking code, but then if it takes a long time to download the variations, you see flickering as the content rearranges itself. So again, not the best user experience, and also, as I said, usually paid, which might be a concern. And the last bit, which combines best of both worlds, is running server-side tests. So what it means is that when a visitor accesses your page, the original page under the original URL, something on the server will decide if that user should be included in the test, if there's an experiment even for that page, and then it does all the alternations on the server and responds with an altered page to the client. So the client doesn't have to wait for anything apart from the server changing it. And you also don't have any UX issues with any redirects or client-side code running and blocking your page to be rendered. One of the biggest advantages is that it's quite well integrated into the CMSs, usually, if it's done right. And it can therefore leverage a lot of the things that you're used to when you're working with your Umbraco site, for instance, the content editors, etc. However, if it needs to be integrated well inside a CMS, it's usually a lot of work. Just dropping a piece of JavaScript that redirects you somewhere is quite simple, but trying to hack around the CMS to facilitate this functionality might be tricky, unless you use something that's already out there, such as uSplit. I forgot to mention that if you use something like this, you can go much deeper with your tests, and you can also test things like your workflow or logic, or maybe the design of your emails as well, which would be tricky using the conventional methods. So uSplit is here to help you save a lot of time when you want to consider using server-side tests with Umbraco. There's about 3 parts to uSplit. First of all, it carries out all the experimentation within the system, so it hooks up to the correct places to identify the content that's being rendered, to decide whether it should include that user in the test, and then to alter the page. And then finally, it reports the experimentation data back to Google Analytics. So now here's a catch. uSplit relies on Google Analytics to run your tests, and there's a simple reason for that. This is just an integration of Google Analytics brought into Umbraco. So Google Analytics is still doing all the evaluation of your variations, and that's a big plus because you can evaluate them in terms of your goals that you have set up in Google Analytics, such as newsletter signups, if that's what you care about, or conversions, or anything about that. By default, it's page views. That's useful if you want to optimize for bounce rate, for instance. And the other advantage is that you get all your experimentation data available in Google Analytics, so you can use it for reporting purposes inside your funnel analysis, and you get just a much deeper view about how users interact with your site after being exposed to a variation. So that's a plus. So let's have a look into slightly more detail how uSplit is integrated within an Umbraco site. So first of all, this is the user experience. We just added a custom tree here under the content section, which just lists all the experiments that you have running or that just completed, or there's a draft here. An experiment is really just a collection of the original page and variations of that page, which is just the same doc type, just another instance of it. And over there on the right, you see status and weight. That's what Google Analytics reports back to you periodically as it's learning more about how users interact with the site as the experiment is ongoing. And it will start phasing out those variations that aren't performing well, and it will start promoting variations that are performing well. So you start getting the benefits of your changes immediately, even throughout the experiment, and you're also limiting the risk of exposing some poorly designed pages or some poor decisions that you might have to your visitors. So that's quite nice. The way uSplit hooks up into Umbraco when it's rendering the alternation is via this event called publish content request.prepared. At that point, we just look up the ID that's being rendered, and if there's an experiment for that, we do an additional check if the actual user that's currently visiting your page should be included in the experiment. Sometimes you don't expose all your traffic to those experiments. If you have plenty of traffic, and again, you want to limit the exposure, you might only send 20% of your traffic to this experiment. So that's one thing, and the other advantage is that you can use segmentation. A/B testing is actually very popular with people doing personalized sites, because creating personalized content takes a lot of time and effort, and you should really think twice before you start rolling out personalized content for your website, because knowing ahead, you'll be spending a lot of effort just updating it and creating further and further variations of the content. So you can plug in a plugin for uSplit. It's actually relying on Andy Butland's personalization groups plugin, which is, I think, a third mention of Andy in this talk, which is quite good. And you can set up some rules about who you actually want to expose to your experiments. So this way you can do very effective A/B testing for only certain segments, such as US visitors, for instance. And then once we've decided that we want to render the experiment and that this user should be included in this experiment, we just replace the content that's rendered in this pipeline with an instance of varied content. Varied content is just a proxy into the content that's underneath. So it implements iPublished content. Once it reaches your templates, The templates think, oh, it's just an ordinary content. The templates have no idea about the experiment, and once you start accessing certain properties of the varied content proxy, you will either reach into the variation that you created, which, remember, is just another instance of your doc type that you're testing, and using properties there if they're set. If they're not set, it will just redirect to the original page. So you can leave all of the fields blank if you don't want to include them in the experiment. It will always redirect to the original content. Likewise, you can also override the template, which is quite helpful if you want to do more, let's say, hardcore changes into the layout that you have, moving things around. And what's important here is that we don't we don't override this metadata part, which is the context in which the page is rendering, such as URL children or parent. And that's for one single reason. That's to make sure that all your menus are still working. If you have any content query, such as you're on a product listing page and you want to display all your products, it will just always use the original page's products. So you don't have to recreate the same content as you would have for the redirect-based solution if you wanted. And also your URL is still the same and correct. So this is like a shim or a proxy that gets sent to your templates. And the last bit, as I said, is reporting data back to Google Analytics. As I said, it's powered by Google Analytics behind the scenes. Google Analytics needs to know how each variation is performing so that it can update the weights and decide if the experiment can finish if it reached a conclusion. So what you need to do is you need to include a small piece of JavaScript still in your page that will report back the variation to Google Analytics. By default, if you don't do anything in your templates, uSplit will know about that, and it will itself just inject a small piece of JavaScript into the head tag at the end that will render this small piece of JavaScript there so that it's rendered back. Now again, uSplit requires Google Analytics, so I'm assuming that you already have a tracking code embedded in your site. And then there are different ways you can report this data to Google Analytics. All of them are documented on their website. We're exposing two of the most common ways here, which is either if you're using Analytics.js script, or there's this CX API, which is quite, which works in most instances, but it doesn't work in a case where you have more experiments running for a single page. That's, by the way, not recommended, but you can still do that, but that thing wouldn't work. So either use Analytics.js script tag, or if you have anything other, such as if you're delivering the tracking code with Google Tag Manager, you might need to call into that custom method. You get all the variation information there, and you just render the correct calls to the data layer that you would normally do for variation reporting. So you have complete control over this. Okay. Let's have a look at a demo that I created. So I'm saying that it's very simple, so I want to show just how simple that is. Okay. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio, where I created a site. It's a site coming from Umbraco Cloud. So all you need to do here is to go to NuGet Package Manager and find uSplit. By the way, this personalization group is that plugin that will allow you to have segmentation as part of your A/B tests. So I'm going to install this. And as it's installing, because it will take some time, I'm just going to show you the page that we're working with. So the page is Skunk House. When I created this Umbraco Cloud site, I got this funny name, Ondřej's Fearless Skunk. So thanks, Niels. And I quite liked it. It helped me to, channel my creativity into a certain way. So I created this page where you can adopt skunks, and I want to make sure that people are actually adopting them so that they don't stay, in this skunk house adoption orphanage thing. Let me just recorrect. Okay. So just for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to change, let's say, this description here in the banner section. let's say that my hypothesis is that saying that they stink, even though they're free, is not very convincing to the buyers. So I just want to come up with something more nice to convince them to adopt one of these cute little things. Also, I'm not sure if you can read this, so I'm just going to zoom a little bit more. Okay. Let's see how this is doing. Awesome. So uSplit depends on Google Analytics API, as I said. There's libraries that they published. It pulls in a lot of dependencies, but thankfully, because this is running on Umbraco 7.6, you don't have to do much in terms of compatibility. Log4net has been updated. Instance of JSON has been updated. Those were one of the 2 pain points if you used uSplit before. Just trying to get everything work. But now it's all updated and it works fine just as it is. So as these packages are installed, I will need to do, let's say, 2 things. I need to plug in 2 sets of IDs into the site. One set of IDs will allow the website to talk to Google, to the Google API. And the other set of IDs will identify my site, my Google Analytics account, where I want to, where the experiments will live and where all the page views are being tracked. So I need to plug in these 2 sets. Okay, let me just click yes on all these. And once uSplit is installed, you will be greeted by like a README page, which will just point you to this installing and setting up uSplit section. It's a big page, but you can ignore most of this, again, as I said, because we're running Umbraco 7.6, so a lot of the overhead went out, and all we need to do is set up a project with Google API so that we can talk to Google, and then set up the IDs for analytics, as I said. So you just follow this link, register a project. It will take you to this Google API dashboard, console.developers.google.com. Over here, okay, that's okay. Over here, you click Create a New Project. You give it a name, so Krakow Demo, and Create. So my Google Analytics project is created. This is important because, as I said, it identifies your site talking to Google. There's also a quota. You can hit the API only for so many calls, but it's in like tens of thousands, so you don't have to worry about that in most cases. I need to find my project here. This is sometimes a bit cumbersome, and they keep changing this API every 3 months or so, so it's always different whenever I try to do this. Okay, we don't care about this. Oh no. It's not liking something, so let me try again. Okay, let's find the project again. Awesome. So here we are. I created this demo project, and now I want to enable certain API. So I need to tell Google that I want to be talking to the Analytics API in particular. So I will just search for Analytics. This will give this project the permission to use the Analytics API. I click Enable on top. Again, sorry, let me zoom in a little bit. So I clicked Enable on the top. Analytics API is enabled. And now I need to create credentials that I will give to uSplit in webconfig. So it's asking me what API am I accessing. It's Analytics API, and I'll be accessing it from a web server, and I'll be accessing user data because Google Analytics data is users. So click on what credentials do I need, and now this is the most difficult part. You need to set up OAuth properly so that it works. So again, I need to give it a name, so Skanghouse website, and then you need to set up origins, basically whitelist the domains that are allowed to talk to Google, and then you need to give it endpoints to which it can reply with the token that it receives or generates for you. So you can refer back to the section. Essentially, you need to give it all your dev or testing domains and the live domain, and you just copy-paste the thing with the callbacks at the end. So locally, I'm using this URL. So I'll just copy it here, and I'll just use Notepad to stage this because it's a horrendous piece of UI, this thing, this manager. It doesn't allow you to edit text in place. So I just want to prepare everything. And then here's the website that I have, the live site. So these are the domains. And the endpoints, I'll just copy this. Oops. And I need to append the callback URL for the second set. So here we go, and here we go, and the first set of URLs cannot contain a slash. Cool, so I got prepared, I got these domains prepared, so I'm just gonna paste them into the wizard. My local domain, my live domain, and authorized URIs, so again, local domain, and live domain. Create client ID. And that was the most annoying part. Again, it's asking me for names, like naming things, so I honestly don't know what this is used for, but maybe if you find out, you can let me know. So credentials for the app itself have been created. I can now talk to Google API. I need to download a set of IDs, and I need to extract two things, a client ID and a secret that I'll pass into, that I'll set in the web config so that uSplit can use those. So client ID is here. So again, just some more copy pasting. Just bear with me. Hopefully this is finished. Okay, not quite yet. Okay, here we go. This is the installation notes. There's that link. You don't have to remember this. And here's a set of IDs that you need to fill in. They've been already added to your web config, so you need just to scroll to that section. For some reason, I cannot format this properly, so it's just one single line. I apologize for that. But Google Analytics goes here. Then I need the secret, which is here. Copy and paste. And the last bit that's missing here is to identify the Google Analytics account where I want to be saving and posting my analytics data. So I'm on this page. I'm on the analytics account for the Skunk House. I already had the tracking code set up from before, and I just copy, I just copy the account ID from here. You go back and into the property to get the property ID. Paste it here. And now the view. And done. Okay, save. Cool. I think if I got everything right, we can do A/B testing on our site. So let's see. Let's start the website, and let's hope for the best. Actually, I want to go to the back office. Yay, it worked. A/B testing is here. Just what you saw on the screenshot, but new slick UI. Okay, well, I got an error. I tried to expand that, but there's an error. So what we've done so far is enabled uSplit, or the website itself, to talk to Google Analytics API, but we haven't granted it permissions to actually access the Google Analytics account itself. So somebody who has access to that Google Analytics account can grant the website access to those resources. So I click reauthorize. Now it will send me to this authorization flow on Google Analytics. I will log in as myself because I have access to the Google Analytics account, and I will click allow. So now the website will be talking to Google Analytics on my behalf, and it can start creating experiments on my behalf. So that's all good, and let me show you how you can create and run an experiment. So I'm just going to move to the live environment, And I need to log in. Okay, it's all good. Let me see, no experiments, good. So as I said, at the beginning, we'll be optimizing or trying to figure out if there's a better slogan that we can put here. So, it's set up here on the home page, under the banner node or page, and there it is. They stink, but they're free. Awesome. So I need to create a variation for this page first. So I'm just going to create a new home page. I'm going to go to the banner page and set the sub banner. That's the only thing I want to test. So I'm going to put in, I don't know, they are cute. Your children will love them. And I'm going to hope that that's going to increase my conversion rates. Right, and I need to give it a name. So home variation, maybe banner variation to be more descriptive. Okay, save and publish. So now it's been created. You can save these variations in any place of the site that you want. They just need to be published. So you can create a custom folder for these and just not include that folder in your navigation at all and exclude it from your sitemap. You can also just block access to those URLs altogether so that nobody will ever see these boilerplate sites. What also helps is that in this template, there aren't any required properties. So you can override just a single thing as I did here. So I will create a new experiment. I want to test the home node. So I'm selecting the page under test. Create. So the experiment has been created in Google Analytics. It's registered here. Here, segmentation, I don't have that plugin installed, so currently all traffic is participating. And I need to set up the variation. I have the original page under test as my control, and here I can add the variation that I just created. So add existing banner variation, and it's been added as a variation for this experiment. If you have a page that has a lot of required properties, it might be a pain to copy over all those properties over. So just click here, clone original button, and it will create a new variation for you, and it will copy all the data that you had in your original page there. So now I'm ready to start the experiment. And the experiment is running. You can see that initially Google assigned the same weights to those two pages. And now we will be throwing a coin. Let's see if I refresh this, if I'm going to get a variation. Okay, I didn't get the variation. So there's 50-50 chance now that we'll be seeing the variation. Also remember, once you hit the page and a variation has been assigned to you, there's a cookie set. So you will keep seeing the same variation. So I'm just going to create a new private window and paste the page here. I might need to log in again. And we'll be doing this for so long as we get the change. And here it is, actually. So we're quite lucky. So as you can see, the user has no idea that this page is being A/B tested. It's being offered on the same page, on the same URL. And if I look into the source code of this page, here is a small piece of JavaScript that's reporting the variation back to Google so that he knows that somebody visited this page and saw this variation. Okay, so let's get back to my slides then. And final two slides. I wanted to mention that uSplit started all the way back in 2015, where it was just a very dumb plugin that only inserted a single JavaScript into your code if you had a specific property on your page with the experiment ID set. That was all the way back in 2015. But we saw a great use case for using uSplit, so we created a very early prototype. And over the time, people started using it, and we received feedback, and we started iterating over. Now it's a mature plugin. It's been with us for over 2 years. There are 2 Endzone employees working on this, on a side, but when we have time. But also people from the community started contributing. Most recent one is Hakan. He's got already 2 PRs accepted, and one huge one pending. The one that he added is one that supports multiple Google Analytics accounts on his site, because they have a multilingual site, and each of their language variation is using a different Google Analytics account. So I think that's a really useful use case, and he went into lengths to contribute with that. So that's really cool, and I wanted to thank him, even though I don't think he's here. And finally, there's been a few resources that I mentioned in my talk. So I'll share the slides somewhere. I haven't figured out where, but I'll share them. And you can look at the product page, where it explains more about the use cases that you want to support, or what it can do for you or for your agency. I've been also on uHangout last year, where I was talking about uSplit as well, pretty much similar thing that I've done here. There's a really detailed article published on Script.io about doing segmented A/B testing and why you should consider doing that. So I suggest you read that as well. And installation guide, as I said, I showed that, and it's also linked in the README notes. You can access the user guide from there as well. And did I forget? Okay, I forgot one very important link. We don't just contribute, plugins to Umbraco, but also content. And we've written around 30-page long A/B testing guide for Umbraco, which you can read, where we go into much more detail, on the topics that I just showed you. It goes into all the other tools as well, just in case you want to use something else. You're perfectly fine. People are using Optimizely a lot, actually. So you will learn about all the intricacies there of using all sorts of tools, and also how to do A/B testing properly and efficiently, which is something that I didn't cover here, because I'm not a marketing person and it's outside of the scope. So there you go, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Brilliant, thank you. How does it impact performance? Do you have any experiences?
One thing we don't really know, or we would like to have, is somebody very experienced with Umbraco just reviewing the code base. It's a very naive approach where you hooked into that event, as I said, and just replace the object there. We access content just as you would normally in your template. So long as the templating code is, optimized, or the way you would reach into, reach for content, then it should be safe. But I don't think you can use caching with this, because it needs to decide per user basis if it should include that user in the experiment or not. Although that being said, we could probably cache the altered version somewhere, but we didn't go into lengths in doing that. But as I said, it's an open source tool. Everybody's welcome to contribute, and I guess that's in the spirit of the community. So.
Share the URL and see how it performs. We just removed the authentication from.
Oh, you did? Okay. In that case, everybody can have fun. And it's Ondřej's, Ondrej, Fearless Skunk. Yeah. Oh, you tweeted it? Okay. So there you go. No more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.